Hi, I'm Chris Carroll and spiralcalendar.com. It's the 24th of August 2020. This presentation is called Eclipses and Their Echoes. Sort of a rundown of my eclipse research and how it's impacting markets currently. About 22 years ago, I began investigating eclipses. During a discussion on the internet, an astrologer friend maintained that a certain eclipse was important because of other planetary considerations at the time. That didn't make sense to me. Now, an eclipse is an alignment of three bodies, Sun, Moon, and Earth. They all line up, straight lines start casting shadows. How straight is that line? I thought that all eclipses aren't the same. Some are more perfect, better aligned than others. It should seem that if there is an effect, it would be most noticeable at those eclipses where the alignment is most perfect, as it were. This first chart shows 2100 years of solar eclipses. Each eclipse is a dot on the page. They form a nice pattern. The eclipses here are plotted based on their gamma value. The gamma number tells you how perfect that alignment is, as it were. So here, superimposing the Earth, a gamma value of 0 on an eclipse will be an eclipse that at its maximum point, the shadow crosses the center of the Earth. Center of the Earth being the equator on the equinoxes, or further north on the Tropic of Cancer at the summer solstice, etc. Gamma values greater than 1 or less than -1, the shadow misses the Earth, the shadow of totality, and those are partial eclipses. Now, these dots sort of almost run in strings across the page as Saros cycles. Every 18 years, the eclipse is similar to the one prior to it. Eclipse cycles that we need to know are this 18-year Saros, and 2 times that is 36 years. And successive Saros are staggered by 29 years on average. And 2 times that 29-year period is 58 years. This staggered cycle, this is called the inex, is the displacement between successive Saros. 36 years and 58 years are important because they are harmonic with spiral calendar time units. The 58 years, 717 moons, that was the exact distance between the crash of 29 and the crash of, say, 87. And I also found specific spiral calendar relationships on the F27 time unit, which is 35.8 years, very close to 2 times the Saros cycle of 36 years. Let's take a look at those relationships. This is a chart which plots eclipses not by their gamma value on the Y scale, but by their Saros number, their Saros sequence. So each dot is spaced 18 years apart per each Saros. Now, when a Saros crosses that 0 gamma, the eclipse closest to 0 gamma is denoted here with a yellow triangle. And up at the top, you can see new Saros cycles series being added, and on the bottom, old Saros die. This red lines, this is something I call the panic necklace. And it just is a fascinating example of this 36-year and 58-year harmonies between emotional market events. We can start, there was a panic in 1763, I think it was in Amsterdam, Europe somewhere. There was a banking panic, and 36 years later in Hanover, in October, Hanover, Germany. 58 years after that, there's the crash of 1857, a worldwide event. And so you notice how that 58 year jumps this necklace up by 2 Saros numbers, and it's now residing on another Saros sequence. At 36 years, you get the summer panic of 1893. Another 36 years brings you to 1929. And then it's a 58-year jump again up to realign with the Saros and the October 87 crash, and another 36 years would bring us to 2023. We'll see what the summer brings us. But notice how this panic necklace, as it were, it follows right the underbelly of the central eclipses. So all these panics are occurring on Saros cycles that have passed through their central and are now beginning to wane in intensity. And conversely, above that central gamma line, we can see some green relationships. We're going to look at those a little bit more closely now. This chart, similar, it shows the five topping relationships that I found separated by 36 years and staggered by 29. The 1901 and 1930, which were really emotional eclipse events, emotional events that occurred very close to eclipses. And then you have what I call the echoes in 37 and 73 and 66. I thought there was going to be a top in 2001 based on this. It didn't come into play. The 2020 eclipse, this one this past June, lies on that same Saros sequence that produced 1930 and 1966. Here's another depiction of that relationships of the tops. I made this chart in 1999, the panic top of 1901, and then subsequently you add the spiral calendar, and you don't add the Saros. Notice that the echo, as it were, doesn't occur on the eclipse. It occurs a couple of months earlier on the spiral calendar anniversary of the original market event. And then you add the spiral calendar number again, and you get the 73 top. And then notice just how precise these relationships are. 1 day, 3 days, 6 days. This is the feature of the spiral calendar. These things come in on time. The idea that there are echoes after emotional eclipse events, and I consider 1901, 1930 emotional eclipse events. We got to test this idea again. In 1984, on this same Saros sequence, there was a market event right on the eclipse. Interest rates topped. The highest top was in September of 81, but interest rates made a second lower peak in May of 84, literally on the day of the eclipse. And so based on that, I was looking for an interest rate low at the end of March of this year. I made that forecast. It's on the website on January 20th. And I'm looking for a general transition from a deflationary environment to an inflationary environment to kick in March of 20. We pretty much know what happened. In March, interest rates plunged precipitously, and then the credit markets essentially blew up on the 9th of March. The Fed has stepped in. They have not gone lower since that day. We've not had a lower print on either bond futures or the 10-year yields. But interest rates haven't taken off either, which I think is due to the heavy hand of the Fed. This emotional echo event showed up in other markets. We saw a sharp plunge in gold that then snapped back. I mean, that doesn't look like a deflationary low in the gold chart, but again, the heavy hand of the Fed has very much distorted markets. And the place where that echo from 1984 also showed up is crude oil. And it made a sharp low in April of 2020. Now, the 2016 low in crude oil and the December 2015, those were another perfect examples of a spiral calendar relationship. And that was sort of the clue that we are transitioning into inflation. Once that December 2015, which was also a spiral calendar from the all-time high in gold. It was a pretty remarkable forecast. The June 2020 eclipse was very interesting. It lies on a Saros that had produced an emotional market event back in 1930. It had since produced an echo of that. We got another echo in March from the 84 emotional eclipse event. And then in January, I showed many spiral calendar relationships pointing close to and in the vicinity of that June eclipse. And I also noted how this eclipse fell very close to the precise solstice this year. And some of those spiral calendar relationships were very big, the 1962 low, the 1974 low, but they didn't all pinpoint with a precision. They were somewhat scattered all over the place. And the market has continued higher past that eclipse, though we think 2020 still may mark a top. But now I have another interesting angle on this. In addition to the two spiral calendar harmonics, the F29 and F27 shown here earlier, I found a third one. And this one's somewhat interesting, and that is the F32 spiral calendar time unit, which is about 119 years. That's equivalent to 5 cycles plus 1 INEX. And so we can actually see that the eclipse event of 1901, the panic of top of 1901 in May, we had the F32 spiral calendar time unit, and it comes up with 5th of September, less than 2 weeks away. There's some fascinating things, and there's the maybe we're on the wrong track. You know, the F29, F27 relationships, these are things I found in the data. They were observed in the data, and then we've used them since to forecast. This F32 relationship, I am surmising that it could be effective and could mark an extremely important top here. But I don't have examples of that working in the past, so it could be a reach. But there are two aspects of it which I find particularly intriguing. And, you know, in a sense, what we're doing is we're mixing and matching, because the eclipse relationship and the Saros relationship, you go 5 Saros back, and that's the 1930 eclipse event, and the 2020 lies on that Saros cycle. But the spiral calendar relationship is to the other earlier Saros and going back to the panic. But let's plot those two Saros cycles by their gammas. And we can see it's very curious that this is exactly the point where they intersect. The earlier 136 Saros, that is on an ascending node, and so it's been moving higher across the latitudes. And it has already passed its zero gamma level. And but it's really just at the same point as the 137 Saros. So that's just very curious that we're at that intersection at a point where geometrically we can relate to the tops from both sequences, whether via spiral calendar or eclipse cycles. Now, the other point is to look at what happened in 1901. You know, I believe that these echoes, in a sense, they're very similar. We should see similar circumstances. You know, the 1987 crash was extremely similar to 1929. Well, in 1901, the panic top was created when Northern Pacific stock was cornered. There were two parties wanted to buy out Northern Pacific, and they got together, they were accumulating shares, and then they each thought they had control of the company. They each had over 50% of the stock. Well, what happened was there were naked shorts who could not cover, and there was, and we had this remarkable distortion in the market where the shorts in Northern Pacific were panicked, and Northern Pacific went to the complete moon, while every other stock got sold off heavily by these people who were being punished. So it was a market distortion where the price of one issue went way out of whack, and it broke the market in a sense, and prices declined from that. But it was a panic, and it was just 9-11 days or so before the eclipse. And you know, we have a very similar situation now in a sense. We have Tesla and Apple; they're just distorting the market for very different reasons. But it's that same kind of climate where there's a couple of things just out of whack and maybe threatening to break this market. So the potential forecast here is for an extremely important top anytime here between now, September 5th, it could be a few days after. Perfect world, it's on my birthday, the 4th of September, Friday. But we could be 5 or 6 days, before that. We could be even at the end of this week. We will have to see. But that's an update on the overview of how I look at eclipses and what I think is their potential relevance right now. Thanks for watching.